sensationalist. In case you don't know, Dolly's a native North Carolinian. She was born in Greensboro, and there are actually artifacts of her clothing in the Greensboro Museum. If you know anything about the history of the Guilford County area, it's no surprise that she was reared as a Quaker. She was, however, shunned by the Quakers because her first husband, John Todd, who died of yellow fever 3 years after their marriage, was not a Quaker. So Dolly eventually joined the Episcopal Church. And in her role as First Lady, Dolly quickly became a leader of fashion. She tried new styles, new colors, in dresses, shoes, and hats, and other women quickly copied her. It got that she quit wearing wigs, which had been a huge fashion statement prior to her getting into the White House. She wore a long train to her gowns in public, put on emeralds, acquired a parrot, and as you had mentioned when you were looking at the picture, revealed cleavage, and other women began to do the same. She is probably most famous for wearing the turban headdress, which was actually a Turkish style that was fashionable both here in America and in Europe at the time that Dolly was in the White House. As I mentioned earlier, we typically think of Dolly as the person who grabbed Gilbert Stuart's portrait off the walls of the White House and rolled it up out of its frame and stuck it up under her long skirts, and we're not sure whether or not that's urban legend or the real deal, except for the fact that we know the portrait has survived. But what is not always known about Dolly is that she was really worried about her $2,000 French wardrobe making it past the British and the French blockades that were in place during the time of the war. Because Dolly is what we would call today a clothes horse, and she enjoyed her clothing, and her bills for her clothing at that time, if we were talking about the early 1800s, $2,000 plus was a pretty significant piece of money, and she also had to pay duty on that clothing. She was also the First Lady to have comments made about the fact that she did show the excessive cleavage, and it was considered scandalous because she had been a Quaker, because modesty is part of the Quaker clothing. One time, Abigail Adams wrote in a letter that Dolly unabashedly resembled a nursing mother. There is an interesting story about her meeting a Quaker friend and she said to him, "Friend, where is thy hat?" Because Quaker men typically always wore a hat. The man supposedly saw her expose cleavage and said to her, "Woman, where is thy kerchief?" where is the kerchief to cover your cleavage? So she established herself very strongly in this style. She was copied, and that is a lot of, and she is remembered still even to this day as being very fashionable. So I'm going to now fast forward to 1856. And this is Harriet Lane. Harriet Lane was the niece of James Buchanan, who was our president before Abraham Lincoln. Buchanan was a bachelor, and Harriet Lane served as his hostess. She was known for being a very fashionable woman. The use of flowers as a border across dresses was very common, as was the large hoop skirts, which were a very typical design element of that day. What I also want you to take a look at is, again, the low-cut bodice, the flowers, and the design of the dress. And then if you can kind of hold that thought, see if that doesn't look the same. And that is Mary Lincoln, who so admired Harriet Lane's gown that this is the gown that Mary Lincoln asked her dressmaker, Elizabeth Keckley, to make for her for Lincoln's inauguration.